This is Donna with More Than a Review, and I am just thrilled to be here with August. We're going to talk about, he's written 2 books. Let me share them with you. Brother John, who I have read and reviewed, so you'll be able to see my review on More Than a Review. And then Business Secrets for the Trappist Monks. And we're going to talk about this. This is not just a book in theory. Like, he has used this for his very successful businesses. And I just want to share some of these pictures because these are absolutely beautiful. We'll talk a little bit about Glenn, but the pictures are, they help you kind of feel like
I'm jealous of Glenn.
Everybody does love those pictures. So August, tell us a little bit about...
He's the artist who did the paintings.
Yeah, yes, he is. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up at the Abbey and what was a typical day like when you got there?
Well, I ended up there because I was going through the mother of all midlife crises, and one of my students from Duke University was down there as what's called a monastic guest, and he called me, and I went down and I was blown away, so I became a monastic guest so that I could go there for extended periods, and I was not going there out of curiosity or for God forbid that I was thinking, oh, I'll write a book someday. No, it was I was not an author, not a writer, I was a business person at the time, and so I applied to become a monastic guest. Now, as a monastic guest at this Trappist monastery, you fundamentally become a temporary monk. And it's open to men only. You can go there as a retreatant. They're beautiful, and I would highly, highly recommend, if you're looking for a spiritual experience, it basically starts as soon as you come through the gates with the quiet and the beauty. Go to Mepkin Abbey. It's outside of Charleston, South Carolina. They have a beautiful retreat center, beautiful rooms there. It's even as far as money is concerned, they just ask for donations, and you don't have to do anything. You can sleep all the time if you want, or you can go to the church and you can maybe volunteer to do some work, do whatever you want. But as a monastic guest, and that's open to women, so women can do that as well. But as a monastic guest, you're actually living behind what they call the cloister wall, and you get a room. By the way, the rooms in the guest house are 1,000 times better than the rooms the monks live in. So you get one of their rooms, which reminds me a lot of a really, really cheap motel room. You just have one room with a table, a desk and a chair, a reading chair with a reading lamp, a single bed, a real narrow little single bed, and your closet has just got a curtain in front of it so you can hang a few things, and then you do have your own bathroom. And that's what you do. So what's the life there? So you get up first thing in the morning, at 3 o'clock in the morning, the bells go off.
Which many of us would think is nighttime, but first thing in the morning.
Yeah, so 3 o'clock in the morning you get up and the 3:20 is the first service, which is vigils. All of the services besides Mass are pretty much the same. The monks sit across from each other and they chant the Psalms. So one side chants the first 2 lines, and the other line is sung. It's sung back and forth to each other, and they have what's called I can't remember just right now, but they tones that mean there's going to be a different. So it's not always the same tune. And then there's always a reading and special prayers that are said around that. But the fundamental thing is a hymn, sing a hymn. So they're all, is the psalm. So that goes to about 4 o'clock in the morning, and then you're supposed to be. Then you're supposed to go and do meditation and private prayer. And then a couple hours later, an hour and a half later, they have lauds, which is about 30 minutes. It's pretty much the same thing. Lauds in Russian means, in English, in Latin means praise.
Okay.
To laud somebody. And then there's Mass, and then there's terce, and then you go to work. So then you work all morning, and then at 12 o'clock, you come back for another service called noonday prayer, or sext. It's technically sext, but everybody calls it noonday. Then you go to lunch, and that's the main meal of the day. So breakfast is served, and you have cereal and eggs and hard-boiled eggs and things like that. For a lot of the food is great. It's vegetarian; they don't eat meat, but it's really, really good. And then at noon, you have your big meal of the day, and then they have a service right after that. And then you you get a siesta for 45 minutes, which I've never been able to understand, because by the time you lay down and fall asleep, you have to get up and go to work. So I never take the siesta. And then you work all afternoon till about 4 o'clock or something like that. And then dinner or supper is at 5 o'clock, and that's just sandwiches and soup, cheese sandwiches, peanut butter sandwich, some people you can have cereal if you want. A lot of the monks don't even eat the supper. And then you have Vespers at 6 o'clock. It's 30 minutes more of the same kind of praying, and then you have an hour, which is basically your free time. And, and if you want to talk to somebody or have a conversation or something, you're probably going to do it between 6:30 and 7:30. And at 7:30 is a Compline, which is a really beautiful service. It's short, only about 25 minutes. And then you go to bed. So you're in bed at 8 o'clock at night, and you get 7 hours sleep. That's why you get the 45 minutes for your siesta. So you get 7 hours of sleep. You do this 6 days a week, and then which is identical. And then Sundays are they have masses later in the morning, and a lot of the local people come. Not a lot, but a fair number of local people come to mass. And then you have the day off, so you don't have to work. But you still go to all the church services, even though you're not working. So Vespers is earlier on Sundays, 4 o'clock rather than 6. But and that's what it is. Day after week after week, month after month. You're just doing the same thing day after day.
So do they speak during the day, or is it just that 1 hour?
Yes. But there's idle chatter, and is discouraged. So you try to keep silent, and you don't talk at work. If you're at work with somebody, you're not going to be talking to that person. And from 8 o'clock at night until after Mass in the morning, which is like 8 o'clock 8 or so in the morning, it's called the Grand Silence. And during that period, nobody's talking. And even if you come walking down and you pass somebody, you probably won't even acknowledge them. You probably won't even wave. You might, but you don't talk. So that is and then behind the cloister wall, there's the church, and then there's a wall that goes across the center, a brick wall that's only about 3 feet high. It's called the cloister wall, and that's where the monastery proper is, behind that wall. And you're not supposed to talk at all back there. Okay. But Sunday afternoons are great talking times, because what you'll do if you want to take a walk, you can take a walk for a couple hours in the woods. See, it's 10,000 acres of beautiful. Cooper River runs through the center of the monastery, and the monastery was originally a rice plantation. Henry Lawrence owned it, and he was the first president of the Continental Congress back in the Revolutionary times. Then it ended up becoming the winter resort for the Henry and Claire Booth Luce. Henry Luce started Sports Illustrated and Time magazine. Claire Booth was a very, very famous intellectual back in the 30s and 40s. And they married, and they bought this and made this into their place. And they have the Luce Gardens are still there. But then what happened is her daughter was killed in an auto accident, and when she was very young. And so Claire Booth had a spiritual awakening. She converted to Catholicism, and then she decided to give all this land to the church. The local diocese didn't know what to do with 10,000 acres of woods and everything, so they ended up giving it to the Trappists. And back in 1948 or something, and some monks from Kentucky came down to Charleston, South Carolina, and that's how it all started.
Wow. That's amazing how one decision and all the repercussions, which are positive, but...
The dominoes.
The dominoes, yeah. So what inspired you from your trip to actually put it into like a book? What kind of... Because you didn't go there to do that.
Yes. So actually the incident that takes place, this is about a story that happened between Brother John and me on Christmas Eve, when I was a monastic guest. And then years later, in 2004, 2005, I'm still coaching college students. I'd sold my businesses by this time and actually had gone away to study theology. I was doing other things, but I'd left the company after a couple of years after selling. And my college students started agitating, and they said, "You've got to enter this contest, the Templeton Foundation. You got to write something." So I looked it up online, and here it was, in 3,500 words or less. The Templeton Foundation said it was the Power of Purpose essay contest. Answer the question, what is the purpose of life? 3,500 words. I'd never written anything except business stuff or school papers in my life. So there, come on. So all right. So and I only had a week. I mean, it was open to previously published material, professional writers, international. I've been going on a year and a half, and I have a week, 10 days maybe, I forget. And so I started taking a crack at it. I'm getting nowhere. And and another one of my students said to me, so how you doing? I said, no, I said, I got a waste paper basket full of crumpled paper, you know. He said, why don't you just write that story about Brother John? You're always telling it.
Wow.
You're always telling people that story. Why don't you write that story up? And I thought, that's not a bad idea. So bang and bang, I just wrote it in like 48 hours.
Wow.
I spent another 48 hours editing it and proofing it and stuff like that. And I submitted it, and I remember submitting it at the deadline and forgetting about it because I thought, you know, there's no way this is going to win, but it's very spiritual, et cetera, and we're in a secular world now, and you know. And on top of that, I said, but I really like it. I said, I like it because I love Brother John so much, and I really feel like I've gotten something off my chest about him, you know, that I've wanted to say for a long time. So 6 months goes by, I've forgotten completely about it, and I get a telephone call at home, and there's a bunch of people on the other end, and they're trying to tell me that I've won the $100,000 grand prize. And I literally, this is a true story, I thought this was my friends. You know, I have the kind of friends who would
do that
who would yank my chain by pretending they were the Templeton Foundation, you know. And I remember I'm yelling, no, and they're yelling, yes, no, yes, no. And finally I realized I'd won the $100,000 grand prize. Wow. And the next thing you know, I'm flown up to New York City to the Four Seasons restaurant where they had the big award ceremony. And God bless, they invited Brother John to come, and the abbot at the time, Father Francis, was gracious enough to allow him to leave. They never leave the monastery. Yeah. And he came up, and my dad, who was, by the way, his health was failing, he was on oxygen at that time, and God bless, he was able to come as well. And Rick Warren, who was one of the four judges, was one of the people that gave me handed me the big, one of the giant checks, you know, when we were shaking each other's hands, you know. So that was the beginning of, you know, what do they say? Some people have reached fame, and some people have a thrust upon them, you know. So that was my Andy Warhol. So then Brother John was reprinted in the Best of Christian Writings, the Best of Catholic Writings. And then I sit down one weekend, I don't even remember why, and I said, well, I decided just noodling on paper, why are these monks so darn good in business? You know, they don't care about business. They probably can't even spell the word business. They work only 4 hours a day. They work in silence. They're 65 years old or older on average. Yet everything they seem to touch turns to gold. People line up for their products, and people want to volunteer to even help them. Like me, I'm down there working, you know, and I'm down, and I've considered a special privilege that they allow me to help them make money. How are they doing all this? So I wrote this thing. I thought it was a white paper, and I distributed it to a few friends, and I get a telephone call from Forbes magazine. Wow. So Forbes, the editor at Forbes, who's still my editor, by the way, he says, I'd like to publish this as a article. He said, two things. He said, one, it's a white paper, it's too long. We have to publish it as a 4-part article. He said, and the second thing is I want to change the title. I said, what would you like the title to be? He said, I want to call it Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks. I said, Fred, fine, you know. And so it just exploded. It went viral. It was the most popular article on Forbes for 2 weeks. There used to be a box up at the top, and I would go look at it, you know, and it would say it was the top 5 articles on Forbes. And it was Business Secrets Part 1, Business Secrets Part 2, Business Secrets Part 3. I had 4 of the top 5, you know. So then Fred asks me to become a contributor. Will you write on an ongoing basis for Forbes about leadership with a spiritual angle to it, which I still do to this day. And then I got a telephone call from Columbia Business School Publishing asking me to write Business Secrets of the Trappist, turn it into a book. Yeah. Which I then did. But meanwhile, back at the Hacienda, over the years, I would get these letters from people saying that Brother John had fundamentally saved their life. Yeah. It was so humbling and so wonderful. I mean, even one of my professors sent me an email from when I went off to study theology, and his wife had ran off with another man after 30 years of marriage, and had younger children, and you know, and she just ran off with another man, and he said, all I could do was stand in front of the crucifix and cry. And he says, then somebody handed me your Brother John, and it's given me hope to go, all this stuff, you know. So I would get these letters once in a while, I could dribble, and I think, you know, but I got a candle under a bushel basket. Hardly anybody knows about it. It had its moment in the sun, and now it's gone obscure. And then about 3 years ago, in the summertime, a man drove 5 hours to thank me. And he showed up. He was an executive vice president for BB&T Bank. He was in his 40s, and he said that he thought he loved just adored his wife. He thought he had the greatest marriage in the world. And all of a sudden his wife walked in and said, "I'm out of here." And he went into an unbelievable death spiral. And he said he got to the point of putting a gun to his head. And somebody gave him Brother John. And it inspired him so much that he took a sabbatical from BB&T Bank and went to the monastery. He spent 2 months there himself. And that turned his life around, and he read Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks. And as he was walking out the door, he told me, he asked Brother John how he could reach me. He called me up and asked me if he could stop by. I said, sure. I didn't know why. But he drove from all the way down to South Carolina, 4.5 hours, 5 hours to my house, just to thank me for writing Brother John. So I'm sitting there, and I said, I'm very moved. We're on my porch out in my backyard. I said, I'm really moved. I'm very touched. I said, but I feel terribly guilty, too. And he said, why would you feel guilty? I said, because I got this candle under a bushel basket. Yeah. If you're not the first person, how can I help a lot of people? How can I spread Brother John? So as soon as he left, I called Melissa. You've met Melissa. Yes. Melissa runs my nonprofit. Everything I do through a nonprofit. All the proceeds from my books, my lectures, my consulting, whatever, coaching, all that goes into my nonprofit, and Melissa runs it. So I called Melissa and I said, Melissa, I've been kicking this idea around with you for a couple of years. I said, we got to do it. And my idea was, Brother John's only 3,500 words. How could it be turned into a book? It's not long enough for a book. But what if it was an illustrated book? What if I could find the right artist to illustrate it and turn it into, kind of an adult picture book, the way The Night Before Christmas is for children, right? And so I said, I got to do it. We got to act upon it. So now, where do you start to find an artist? And I don't even remember Glenn Harrington, how I met Glenn Harrington. I don't remember how I met Glenn Harrington. And I've never met him personally. The interesting thing, an artist who's done all this work for Brother John, who's getting all the accolades, the son of a gun, I actually never met him. Wow. And I talked to him a lot on the phone. So I talked to him originally on the phone, and he said, "Oh, I'd love to do this." He said, I want to go down there and take photographs, and I actually have a gallery in Charleston, so it would be, it would work for me that way. And I really want to do something religious. He said, I'm Christian myself. He said, but you can't do any art that's Christian anymore. It's death in the galleries, We're so secular. Nobody, So this would give me an opportunity to do something spiritual. So I thought, wow, I'm really excited, but how do I know I got the right guy? What do I know from art, So I called my nephew who works for Scholastic in New York. And I said, Jamie, can you do some snooping around and find out if this guy's got chops, So he calls me back 2 days later. He says, oh my God, Augie, he's famous. We use him all the time. We pay him 10 grand for one cover. Wow. He said, all the top publishers compete to use him. He's the best. And he wants to do 22 oil paintings for you? He's going to do 22 oil paintings? He says, grab it, go for it, do it. So that's how. So the Lord, I see the Lord's. I tell people that are more of a secular bent, because I'm writing in Forbes and stuff, and I even say it in my book, because I try to write my Business Secrets of Trappist Monks is not targeted only at Christians. I want everybody to feel included in it. I said, but you can call it grace if you're so inclined, but you can call it luck if you're not. I said, but I'm either extremely graced, which I prefer to think, or luck, or tremendous luck, because all this stuff is just followed one thing after another. I never tried to do any of this. I mean, I'm not saying I haven't worked really hard. Putting a book together, writing a book for a publisher is an enormous amount of work. But as far as, I never had an agent. Everything just kind of, one thing just falls after another thing, falls after another thing.
That's amazing. So what do you think it is about this story that just touches so many people? Because, I mean, to your point, it's 3,500 words, but which is also very tough to get that much meaning and purpose packed.
Yeah, and a lot of the reviewers, that was one of my concerns, of course, going into it. When I've really been relieved and pleased about it, so many people have said that it's yes, you can sit down and read it in one sitting, which is cool to be able to read something in one sitting. On the other hand, it's something you come back to again and again because you're mining out more and more things. But I think that there's several reasons why I think. One, you know, and I'm not putting them in order of priority. I think that one of the things is that it's genuine. I mean, the guy, I was that people identify with me in the story.
Yeah.
I was going through a very, very, very difficult time in my life, and I think that the other thing is that I'm able to write it from. I realize now that if I hadn't had the spiritual experience, I wouldn't have been able to write this book. When it happened, it wasn't like this wasn't the solution to my problem. When it happened, it intimidated me. I was thinking, I'll never be this. I can never accomplish. I can never be like Brother John. So I think that is one thing. So I think that I touch a chord of just it's genuine. It's truly it's authentic.
Yeah.
I think another thing is that it's we're touching on the most important issue I think in Western civilization today, which is purpose.
Yeah.
Purpose. People need purpose in their lives, and we were talking off air that the opioid crisis and the suicide crisis and the depression crisis and the loneliness crisis and the gun shooting crisis. In my opinion, these are all offshoots of the one fundamental spiritual crisis: a lack of higher meaning and higher purpose in so many people's lives, and they're trying to substitute self-indulgence for that lack of higher meaning and purpose. And as I say in Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks, we make a mistake of thinking that's what we want, is an easy life of self-indulgence. What all human beings really want is sacrifice. We want to give ourselves away. We don't want to hold ourselves. We want to give ourselves away to something worth giving ourselves away for.
Yeah.
We want to be lifted up and out of ourselves by a big something, and that's not available. There's, the churches aren't getting it done for many, many people. The family is in tatters, so fathers aren't getting it. I'm going to be giving a big talk to business people in Washington, D.C., and I'm calling it a leadership crisis. Because job one for leaders, which I learned from my Lewis Mobley, who was my mentor, who started the IBM Executive School, he said, job one for leadership is to create a higher meaning and purpose. The mission of the organization. Why are we in business? Why are we together? What's the business of the business? He said, and so to me, when people don't have a sense of higher meaning, you can also call that a leadership crisis, whether it's clergy, whether it's parents, whether it's business people, whether it's academics, educational people. Nobody is coming up with a big message. The final thing I think that really, which I had so much fun, I thought actually that when I wrote the very first paragraph of this book, I said, everything is relative today, and so everybody thinks we all have our own purpose, and who's to say what purpose is? And I said, I reject all that. I said, we all have exactly the same purpose. And I go on to define that purpose as self-transcendence, to become like the best human being we can possibly be. I get much deeper into that in the Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks, because what I say is that what we're all longing for, that all of life is a transformational journey, which I identify with the hero's journey. I don't know if you've ever heard of the hero's journey. But it's all a transformational journey, and the transformational journey is from selfishness to selflessness. And I point out that in marketing, we have something called dollar votes. Don't listen to what people say. Watch what they spend their money on. That's what they really care about. Because that hard-earned money, that stored-up energy, that's your energy. That's what's going to sell. And I say, when I look, I see people spending tons and tons of money on movies and stories. And what do we know about all these movies and all these stories? They're all about a hero, and 9 times out of 10, it's the story of a hero being transformed. He starts out as a selfish jerk, like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, right? And he goes through this transformational journey, and he ends up a selfless person at the end. Mr. Scrooge, all these things. And Joseph Campbell came up with a model, and he called it the hero's journey, from selfishness to selflessness. And this is not a learning process, as you and I were talking about off camera as well. This is a becoming process.
Yeah.
You don't, a caterpillar doesn't learn to be a butterfly. An acorn doesn't learn to be an oak. An acorn must become an oak. A caterpillar must become a butterfly. And we want to become. The hero's journey is a becoming process. You go from being a baby screaming, mine, 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 to a selfless person. And that's what we all really want. And I define that as I call it a transformation of being. So I said I've spent my entire life, especially in business, and human motivation is extremely important. What motivates people? How can I get my salespeople fired up? Passion is everything. If I can get passionate people, you can do anything. So what do people really want? And I finally identified that what people want is to be transformed.
Yeah.
We're longing not to be selfish, we're longing to be selfless.
Yeah.
We want to give ourselves away. What is the number one symptom of depression? I have been severely depressed. I know what it is. It's you sit in a chair and you can't think of anything worth doing. Yeah. Nothing. A friend of mine said the worst part of depression, who had a very serious depression problem himself, he said the worst part of depression is you can't think of anything that would make you feel better. And so what are you thinking about? Yourself. You're in a chair. You can't even hardly move, and you're thinking about it. I'm depressed, I'm depressed, I'm depressed, I'm depressed. Well, what's the first word there? I. And when the time is flowing, and when you're absorbed in a task, or you're carried away by something, you're not thinking about yourself at all. Yeah. So happiness is highly correlated with not with selfishness, but with selflessness. Getting out of your own way. And so my, as I mentioned to you before, I said we're all longing for transformation, but there's three kinds of transformation. When a thirsty man drinks, he transforms his condition. When a poor man hits the lottery, he transforms his circumstances. But when Mr. Scrooge wakes up on Christmas morning an utterly new man, he has experienced a transformation of being. And I think this, going back to your question, this book touches that deep note inside, because that's what we're talking about here. Brother John has experienced a transformation of being. And that's what makes him such a beautiful, beautiful subject for the story. And it's, I think, whether you can put your finger on it or not, you understand intuitively that this is what I'm longing for, and scared to death that I will never reach, that I'm incapable of this transformation of being. So the optimistic thing, that it's what I've dedicated my life to now, is, especially coming out of the spiritual experience that I had myself, it is possible. Yeah. It isn't something you have to be a monk to do. It isn't something that is only for saints. You can experience this transformation of being. And as I mentioned to you, I suffered from severe depression from the time I was an adolescent. And I just would kind of beat it down and stiff up a lip and keep pushing myself into business and things like that, even into my spiritual path. And then finally, when I had this accident happen to me in '96, I couldn't hold it back anymore. I couldn't shove it down anymore. And I was terrified it was swallowing me up. And I was going to be sucked down into God only knows what. And since 1998, when I had my experience, spiritual experience, to today, which is 21 years, I've not had one moment of depression or anxiety or panic or anything like that. So there is a religious / spiritual answer.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the key to this book is, I think what you mentioned too is you don't have to be a monk.
No.
We highly recommend this book, and I've read it, my father-in-law's read it, and there is something that just jumps off that page and does resonate with people. It is, we would highly recommend it. And I tell you now,
and if I may do a slight sales pitch, as if I don't know how to stop selling, it's an amazing Christmas gift.
Yes.
So it's something that people, again, can read in one sitting. It's got beautiful artwork. Yeah. Retail is only $20. I think Amazon's selling it for $15 or something like that. Yeah. So for a $15 Christmas present, it is a wonderful Christmas present.
It can be life-changing, and has been for so many.
Right.
But I tell you, I've definitely got to read this now after, this sounds like it goes a lot more in depth from like your experience there. So this definitely, the Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks, I would highly recommend that.